And when people talk about the humble apple, they're not aware of the significance that the apple has had in culture. It's had more significance than any other fruit, so I'm going to call it the noble apple, not the humble apple.
Hello, my name is Rhea Wincaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world. Talking about the noble apple and bringing us into this here episode number 440 of Cider Chat, we heard from Jane Peyton. She was delivering a keynote address at the Hereford AppleFest Banquet this past October. And that is going to be our featured presentation on this episode, her full address, which I really found delightful. She is so witty in all the best ways. This is all part of the Hereford AppleFest, and it takes place in the fall in Hereford, and all the different cideries, all the different happenings, daytime events happening all over the map. And then on that weekend, which in the U.S. we would know as Columbus Day weekend, was the final banquet, and it's held at the Hereford Town Hall. It was just really nicely executed. Tom Oliver spoke, and there was just a lot of amazing energy there, kind of culminating that whole week. And I happened to be on site and able to record this address. I recorded a couple other addresses. You are in for a treat, Ciderville, because we are now kicking off January of 2025 with a series featuring the United Kingdom. Yes. And the cider makers, the scene there. We're going to be hearing from Elizabeth Pimblett of the Museum of Cider in Hereford. That's an upcoming episode. We'll be talking to Tom Oliver, Albert Johnson of Ross Cider. Of course, Tom is of Oliver Cider and Perry Company. We're going to be talking to the folks at Wilding Cider. That's down in Somerset, a little bit further south of Hereford, because right now, is a time to get on the wait list for the UK Cider Tour that's going to be taking place August 25th through the 31st in 2025. This is, one of the international tours led by me, Rhea, your host. One of our Totally Cider tours. This time we're going to the UK. It's going to be absolutely delightful. We'll land in Bristol. That's our meeting point. Hang out in Somerset. Visit Wildings Cider. That's one of our stops. If you don't know Wildings, that is Sam and Becca. I had a lovely sit-down time with them. I did an amazing recording in their home, which will be visiting their orchard on site and their beautiful garden during the UK Cider Tour coming up. So there's a lot going on in 2025. And if I haven't said it yet, Happy New Year to you, Ciderville. I hope all the best will happen for you in this next year, just kind of building upon goodness in your life. May it always be so. And here at Cider Chat Central, I have to say we're stoked. One is to launch off with this keynote from Jane, because she is so whimsical in all the best ways. She's an author. She's going to be talking about her book, The Philosophy of Cider, which everybody should have a copy of. She also is an author of The Philosophy of Gin. She's the instigator of the Beer Day Britain, UK's National Beer Day, which is celebrated annually on June 15th. So she's in that beer, cider, wine. She's a drinks writer. She is the founder of the School of Booze. She's going to talk a little bit about, I love the name of that. It's a consultancy offering online courses and training in beer, cider, and wine, and really more. She's a distinguished alcohol drinks educator, writer, broadcaster, and public speaker. And she's really renowned for her expertise, I think, as a public speaker, because that's how I really see her, and also as an author, and of course, on the two topics that we all love, primarily being cider for this here podcast, but also beer. And I have to admit, I do love my gin. So you go, Jane. You are the dudette for today's episode. And I'm so thrilled to be able to kick off the first episode of the new year with Jane Peyton. So we're going to be going to that keynote address coming up. I'll have a little bit more to say about that when we get there. But first, a couple messages from advertisers helping to keep this podcast on the air. Coming up February 4th through the 7th is CiderCon, and this is the annual trade conference hosted by the American Cider Association, and it's going to be taking place in Chicago. And as always, it is an amazing event. It's in this huge hotel that has a grand banquet hall. You don't have to go outside to get to the banquet hall. It's all right on site. And of course, it's in Chicago. And during that week, they have Chicago Cider Week. Go online and check that out too. I'll have a link in the show notes. But for CiderCon proper, you want to arrive early. I highly recommend that you arrive on Monday, February 3rd, so you could take some of the time that is necessary to get there, because you never know how weather's going to be. But also, maybe you could sign up, if there's still tickets left, to the Chicago Experiences, because there are tours going around Chicago. There's also a dinner one night in Bronzeville that evening of February 4th. I'm going to be there. Hope to see you there. And then on Wednesday, things start really bright-eyed and bushy-tailed with the Certified Palmier exam. There's a TTB Federal Compliance Boot Camp, the Science and Art of a Balanced Cider workshop by the Cider Institute of North America, another workshop called Tap into Growth, a digital marketing boot camp for cider brands, and then another workshop all Wednesday morning called Key Habits for Financial Health for Cideries. Any one of these are worth your time, believe me. So check it out. Go to ciderassociation.org. Register now. You know, there's always a little run on the hotels. So if you haven't gotten your hotel room yet, this is your reminder to do that. Find out all the info. There is a rate for folks attending CiderCon, again, by going to ciderassociation.org. And when you register for CiderCon, make sure to use the promo code CiderChat. That's all one word, and the 2 C's are capital. And that will get you $30 off your registration fee. So I hope to see you there in Chicago coming up February 4th through the 7th. Again, go to ciderassociation.org. This past fall, I had just led the French Cider Tour, and I had to take the opportunity for being overseas to be able to do some research for something I've been wanting to do for quite a while, which is to lead a cider tour to Somerset and Herefordshire. And I knew I couldn't do that from my computer. There's only so much. Sure, you know, if you're going to be leading something that's, I don't know, educational or something like that, you could, you know, have the hotels and find out where you're going to eat and go to the locations. But if you're going to lead a totally cider tour, which is what I do, you don't just look at the hotels where you're going to eat or the cider makers. And all of that is really important. Believe me, the cider makers and those spots, that's critical. Actually, that's very critical, I should say, of course, because you could go to the most outstanding cidery and then taste the cider and go, I'm not sure if this is really where it's going to be worth our time. Maybe we'll go back there in a couple of years. And that's some of the decision making that I make when I'm choosing locations for a totally cider tour. So I was on site looking for that, but also looking for those little gems that inform me why people are in that region of the world and not only making cider, but loving it there. What is the reason behind that? Because that's going to inform me about what's in the glass. I don't know. You know, when I was first starting out to making cider, like, it was all about technique, and Cider Chat does offer a lot of technique. Do the science if you want to do it, or just play it by ear and feel for it, or maybe you have some kind of family that's been in orcharding. All that really is great, but in the end, it's, to me, so much more than what is in the glass. It's a journey from the orchard to the glass and all the sights and sounds and people along the way. And that's what I look for when offering a totally cider tour. And, you know, so here I was in France, in that zone. And let's face it, France is just freaking amazing. I mean, you look everywhere and it's like you're in a perpetual state of like euphoria, like, oh, just that bush looks ornate. And you go to a different spot, if you come to New England, it's going to feel different where I live. It's not like France. So we've been hearing so much about English cider makers or makers in Wales. And believe me, Wales is not considered English. They're in their own zone there. The Welsh, for sure. Don't say that when you're there. So I wanted to go in this area and find these gems. And that's how I spent my time, traveling about, getting lost, because that is one of the prerequisites I find, getting myself lost, learning how to drive on the left side of the road. Anyways, I got lost. I sought these places where folks I find sometimes on the street, or who are local, I should say, will say, why are you going there? But from an outsider's vantage point, and from the folks that I know that go on Totally Cider tours who want something different, that don't want to just be in constant educational, having that. They want to just luxuriate in the glass with the sights and sounds and experience and have a vacation. Well, that's what I did. I did that research, and that's what we're going to be offering, a Totally Cider tour. We're calling it 2025 Totally Cider Tour UK Edition. That's rolling out on August 25th through the 31st. Now, this tour is going to be going live. That means it's going to be released to the public to register around the end of January, beginning of February. It's going to have an early release to the wait list and to patrons of Cider Chat. So if you are on that list, it will go to you first. And frankly, I will tell you right now, there are so many people on that wait list. So if everybody can get it together between now and when it gets released, the tour is already sold out. But life happens. And sometimes you sign up for the wait list and it doesn't work out. But right now, we have a certain complement, and I am not taking the full complement of folks on the tour that I normally take for something like this. I'm keeping a little bit more smallish and allowing us some mobility there. However, we're going to be on a luxury coach with a bathroom, with a refrigerator, and one hell of a time. One hell of a, I don't know, this, I think they would say in England, one hell of a banger time. I'm not sure if I'm using that right. Oh, God, the English are listening right now are all scratching their head and read. Don't even try it. Anyways, I am super, super excited about this because I feel like we have some, off the beaten trail spots and some really premier locations. And it's not just to do with cider, but it's the sights and sounds of the region. If this at all interests you and you think you could do it, and believe me, the pound is a little bit more than the US dollar, so you want to work that in. I know I have to offer this tour. Get your name in now for the wait list, because we're going to be going to some epic places. I mentioned earlier, Wilding Cider, they do all natural ferments, have a really delicious poy that I had while I was there. It's the one cider, or I should say poy, that I brought back with me, and just a lovely couple. And I mentioned in last week's episode, I believe it was, that we're going to be going to the Shepton Mallet Mill that is called now the Showering Mill. There's an amazing history at this mill of the Showering family who was on site for over 400 years. And it's just epic to be able to walk into. I've never been in such a large facility. And the cool thing about that particular mill is when Baby Sham was being made, it was happening so fast. And that was basically a Perry, right? And it revolutionized so many things. There's a lot of history about it. We'll be getting to that. But the cool thing is that they had to grow so quickly. They got all these tanks, and they were all horizontal tanks. And they started using them before they even had a building. And I was able to go in for one of the first tours they had in a long time like that. And you'll be hearing about that this year, and see all those tanks. And it's just so cool to see cider history as it is in real time and experience that. If you have any passion for apples or this whole industry, or having a good time and, being in the company of others who want to have an experience and not get too deep into the weeds unless you want to, and it's late at night and we're drinking cider, which does happen, then check out this Totally Cider Tour England Edition 2025 coming up this year. Send an email to info@ciderchat.com. Put on the title Cider Tours. Let us know how many folks are in your party, and we will make sure you get on that wait list. And I'm not going to count the months away, but before you know it, August will be here, and we'll be drinking cider in Somerset and Herefordshire, and also attending the Raw Cider Fest. Good times ahead, folks. All right, when I come back, we're going to be going to that main feature with Jane Peyton and her keynote address at the Herefordshire AppleFest Banquet.
Walking through the orchard.
It's time now to head to our featured presentation, a keynote address by Jane Peyton, author of The Philosophy of Cider and founder of the School of Booze. She was speaking at the Hereford AppleFest Banquet, which takes place at Assembly Hall in the Hereford Town Hall. When you walk into the town hall itself, you are greeted by this beautiful staircase, and as you walk up to one level, it splits to the left and right and leads you to Assembly Hall, where there were tables set and just folks dressed to the nines, and what an amazing time. We were able to watch a movie. I believe I'm going to have a link in the show notes to that movie. You could see too. That's really celebrating the regional apple scene and cider scene there. It was very well done. And there were keynote addresses, the one you're going to be hearing by Jane. There was also one delivered by Tom Oliver. And Albert Johnson did a tribute to Susanna Forbes. You will hear mention of Susanna Forbes. And if you don't know who she is, well, allow me to just give you a tidbit of who this woman was. She was very well known as her moniker of Drink Britain, where she was a craft beer writer and really promoting that category. She and her husband, James Forbes, are the founders of Little Pomona, which is a cidery based in Herefordshire. And at that point of really founding Little Pomona just a couple of years back now, I had them on a podcast back in 2018, and Little Pomona was just getting started then. It was also at that time that she was really moving away from craft beer and going deep into cider. And we lost her just way too young, way too early this past fall. Her actual funeral was a couple days earlier. I had the privilege and honor of attending that funeral. We'll talk more about all that in some subsequent episodes coming up here. One thing I know for sure is that Susanna is deeply missed. She's one of those people, when she departed, like, it's just hard to believe that she's gone. And at this time, it's as if she's everywhere. So her absence is deeply felt. And to be in there at that time was particularly moving. It's one of those moments you just never forget. And you could definitely feel it in that room that evening. So I believe that gets you ready enough right now for this keynote address, making this a perfect time to grab a glass and enjoy this presentation by Jane Peyton, the author of The Philosophy of Cider and the founder of the School of Booze.
Like Tom, I don't normally write things down, but I thought I'd better do tonight because I don't want to make any mistakes. Thank you, Tom. Eminence grise of, well, everything really, not just sound engineering, but cider and perry as well. Thank you to Albert for the amazing eulogy to Susanna, which I think all of us will probably about. And if you were willing to put that on your website so we can share it, I think there are many people in the world that would like to read what you said, because every single word you said was just wonderful, so thank you. I wrote my speech before Susanna died, so I've just added a few lines on about Susanna, but we do have a Susanna Forbes shaped hole in this room, and I'm sure many of us will be grateful not just for a friendship, but for the unceasing advocacy for cider and perry. In my case, if it wasn't for Susanna, I wouldn't be here, because I went exploring Herefordshire with her before her and James bought the orchard that became Little Pomona. She took cider and perry seriously, and I thought, well, if she's taking it seriously, I knew her from the beer world, by the way, so if she's taking it seriously, I'm going to take it seriously. And so without Susanna, I wouldn't have become an accredited Pamelier, and I wouldn't be here now. Since Susanna died, I've been speaking to lots of people who loved her, and I realised that everybody loved her. And I don't know anybody in my life who nobody would say a bad word about. Susanna was loved by so many people, just on a personal level, but also respected for what she did for cider and perry and other drinks as well. I first knew her through beer. I wish she'd known what an impact she'd had, because it's extraordinary. It's a legacy which will live on. And she never ceased being in her activism for cider and perry. And she changed the perception of cider and perry. And she was a remarkable person, and we loved her. So wassail Susanna. So this is the speech that I wrote. Good evening, Your Excellencies. You're here at a cider banquet, which means you are ambassadors, or as I prefer to say, ambassadors. It's glorious to be in such esteemed company, and the whole event has been fabulous. I knew it would be. I wrote this before, but I just knew it would be, just from people talking about it previously. And I know we've all thanked the staff who've made it come together, but thank you from me as well. It's been incredible. And thank you to the perry makers for coaxing such magnificence from the fruit. So as I said earlier, I'm an accredited Pamelier. I'm also an accredited beer sommelier, and I'm accredited through the Wine and Spirit Education Trust. So I think you can take it that I quite like a little drinky. And tonight's drinkies have been like that. Thank you. And I'm also the founder of the School of Booze. And when I started my business, I thought, well, it's really important that you should have a name that describes what you do. So some people may have a brand name, and then people they may all say, well, what do you actually do? But I don't have to do that, because School of Booze says what I do. So I train people, I write, I consult, I do events, I do all sorts of things with alcohol, and I write books. I think somebody might have mentioned that, Paul, thank you for that. And my latest non-fiction book is The Philosophy of Cider. Now, I came here tonight, or I came to Herefordshire this weekend with quite a heavy bag, so I do have some of these to sell, and if you do buy them for £10, and don't think, oh, well, I don't have any cash on me, because I've got a card reader, and I made sure that I'd signed up for the government Wi-Fi. Alison, thank you so much for providing me with the ability to do that. I've checked, I've got Wi-Fi, which means that my card reader will work. £10 signed with my best fountain pen. It's called The Philosophy of Cider, and it's the fourth book that I've done for the British Library in this series, The Philosophy of. And this one was really close to my heart, and when I was writing it, I just thought, I can really feel it. Sometimes when you're writing, you don't feel it. And you write, but you try and put some energy and passion and love into it. But with this one, I could just feel all the love going into it. And I know that Elizabeth has bought them for the Cider Museum. Thank you, Albert, for buying them for Ross on Why Cider. Thank you, Tom, for buying my book. Kath, you've got a copy as well. So you want to be with the cool kids, don't you? I also write fiction. I write fiction under a pen name, B.A. Summer, and I've written 2 novels so far that have been published, and in each one I've managed to lever in some knowledge, some education about alcoholic drinks. In the first one, I had quite a long paragraph about what happens in a cellar when you have real ale. And in this particular one, in the second one, I've managed to mention that cider was the original purposely sparkled drink before champagne was. And I mentioned Little Pomona by name. And when Susanna was in the hospice, James had called and said she was in the hospice. And so I texted her and sent a really emotional text. And then I remembered that I'd mentioned Little Pomona in the second book, and she'd loved my first book, which she took when she was having all that horrible chemotherapy, and she took it and read the book and really loved it. So I sent her a little message saying, I've mentioned Little Pomona in the second novel. So I knew that she'd read the text. She didn't respond because she wasn't responding, but I knew that she'd read it. So I'm very glad that it's mentioned in the novel. So let's get down to cider. Now, when I'm enthroned as president of the world, I will rule by decree. I know we've got some Democrats here, and I know we've got an MP here, Ellie Chown. Congratulations, where is she? Green Party MP. So I'm not going to adhere to democracy, not in this case anyway, because what I'll do, I will decree that to be included on the school curricula is the fact that cider is not apple beer, it's pressed, not brewed, and in another decree, I'm going to instruct that restaurants must include a cider selection of freshly pressed juice cider, and on the drinks menu, they put it ahead of the wine, because a wine drinker will never get to the bottom of that menu where the cider and the beer is an afterthought. So put it ahead of the wine, and then they'll go, oh my goodness, there's a champagne method cider from Tom Oliver, and let's have that for a change. So that's one of my decrees. Now, the first alcoholic drink I ever tasted, aged 5, don't tell, was woodpecker cider. Yay, and it was on Christmas Day, and I remember it really distinctly. It was moosey and it was sweet, and I could smell the apples. It was delicious, and I still can't have Christmas dinner without cider. However, now the cider is more grown up, because I'm more grown up, so it's full of tannins, it's full of acidity, and it cuts perfectly through the texture of all the food that I'm eating. Now, we're here at an apple festival. Congratulations, Paul, and everybody who's put it all together. So let's talk about Malus pumila. Pliny, the Roman writer and the naturalist, wrote, I'm going to do his Latin in a Yorkshire accent, by the way. Of all trees, there are some which were altogether wild, and some more civilized. The apple tree is the most civilized of all trees. And when people talk about the humble apple, they're not aware of the significance that the apple has had in culture. It's had more significance than any other fruit, so I'm going to call it the noble apple, not the humble apple. So if you think about how apples appear in English language, you are the apple of my eye. The apple does not fall far from the tree, which is also used in Danish, Lithuanian, Greek, Slovenian, Hungarian, Polish, and Swedish. New York is the Big Apple. You give the teacher an apple. Some men have an Adam's apple. One bad apple spoils the whole barrel. And not least, in the English language, A is for apple. But apple idioms appear in other languages too. In French, a phrase for fainting is tomber dans les pommes, to fall in the apples. The French describe somebody short of stature as être haut comme trois pommes, to be tall like 3 apples. In German, in den sauren Apfel beißen is bite the sour apple, which means do something you don't really want to do. In science, Isaac Newton's apple is a legend that he observed an apple falling, and that inspired the theory of gravity. It may not be true, but it's entrenched in popular culture. Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs is not just about Snow White eating a poisoned apple, it's woven with apple mythology. The evil stepmother searching for the fairest in the land is a reference to the mythical Trojan War, indirectly started by 3 goddesses who were wishing to possess the golden apple, which would bestow the title of the fairest in the land. In business, the name of the world's most valuable company is said to have been inspired by co-founder Steve Jobs' visit to an apple farm, although multiple sources claim it was borrowed from the Beatles' media company moniker. In art, René Magritte's The Son of Man is the instantly recognisable image of a man in a bowler hat with a green apple for a face. Magritte produced another work, Le Jeu d'amour, featuring a green apple inscribed with the phrase au revoir. Paul McCartney purchased the painting, and it's the reason that the apple is the name of the Beatles Media Corporation. Renaissance painters were keen on symbolism, and the apple was something they used in symbols, and it signified redemption from sin. Numerous works feature the Virgin Mary with the infant Jesus holding Malus pumila. If you don't know what that is, by the way, it's the Latin word for the domesticated apple, which is ironic given apple's role in Adam and Eve's original sin. That's arguably the best-known apple story, except it wasn't our apple. It was more likely to have been a pomegranate, which translates in Latin as seeded apple, or it was a fig. Adam and Eve covered their genitals with a fig leaf, not an apple leaf. And Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel fresco for Adam and Eve features a serpent coiled around a fig tree. The book of Genesis does not mention apples. It only mentions, it's unspecified fruit in connection with the forbidden tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And as late as the 17th century in English, apple was used as a term for all fruit apart from grapes. The Bible was written in ancient Hebrew, then translated to Greek, then to Latin, and then from Latin to English. In Latin, malus means any fleshy seed-bearing fruit, including apple. Malus also means evil, so is there a confusion of translation? Probably. In myth, the apple tree was sacred in Norse mythology, and Norse gods owed their immortality to apples. In the Arabian Nights, a magic apple it features, capable of curing all human diseases, predating the belief that an apple a day keeps the doctor away, which is a revised version of the Welsh proverb that appeared in print in 1866 as, "Eat an apple on going to bed, and you'll keep the doctor earning his bread." Ancient Greeks revered the apple as a symbol of love and sexual desire. It was a symbol connected with Aphrodite, goddess of love, and the apple was also associated with abundance and fertility. In health, English horticulturalist John Evelyn, author of the Apple and Cider Guide Pomona, wrote in 1664, I'm going to pretend he's got a Yorkshire accent, by the way, for this as well. Generally, all strong and pleasant cider excites and cleanses the stomach, strengthens digestion, and infallibly frees the kidneys and bladder from breeding the gravel stone. Captain Cook gave his crew members cider. It had been proved as the second most effective way of preventing scurvy after citrus fruit, and Captain Cook never lost a single sailor to scurvy on his expeditions thereafter. John Beale was a scientist and fellow of the Royal Society, and he was prescient about trees when he wrote in 1652 that Herefordshire's apple orchards, quote, do not only sweeten but also purify the ambient air, which I conceive to conduce very much to the constant health and long lives for which our county has always been famous. So you Herefordshire people are going to live forever. In literature, Paradise Lost by John Milton, after Adam and Eve ate the fruit, Satan boasts that the fall of man had been wrought by something as ridiculous as an apple. But Satan had obviously never drunk cider, had he? David Henry Thoreau, the American author, wrote in his book Wild Apples that the apple tree is harmless as a dove, as beautiful as a rose, and as valuable as flocks and herds. And arguably the best-known literature about apples and cider is Cider with Rosie, Laurie Lee's memoir about his rural childhood in post-World War I Gloucestershire. He wrote, never to be forgotten, that first long secret drink of golden fire, juice of those valleys, and at that time, wine of wild orchards, of russet summer, of plump red apples, and roses burning cheeks, never to be forgotten or ever tasted again. Orchards are often symbolic of being safe places with happy memories. In Anna Sewell's Black Beauty, the eponymous character, a horse, says, "My troubles are all over, and I'm at home. And often before I'm quite awake, I fancy I'm still in the orchard at Birtwick, standing with my old friends under the apple trees." So, with all these cultural references, next time you hear somebody refer to the humble apple, please recommend my book, The Philosophy of Cider, and that will enlighten them about the apple, which is the apex fruit. Since becoming a pommelier, it's been a joy to explore ciderland, taste extraordinary ciders and perries, and meet so many evangelists who champion the wondrous diversity of apple varieties, celebrate how the growing season is reflected in what we drink, and marvel at the effect of wild yeast, slow fermentation and aging. And to the man who produced the film, by the way, loved it, and I really loved all the mentions of the perry and the apple varieties, and it reminded me that in the olden days when Twitter had 140 characters, I used to write the soap opera of apple varieties, and in 140 words I'd tell a story, with punctuation as well, by the way, and I quite often lend on Darcy Spice and Slack My Girdle. Now, I think you can probably imagine what was going on there with that soap opera, but I had great fun reading all the names of the apple varieties. I've been to Herefordshire a few times recently. This is my third visit in the last year, and I find Herefordshire and apples really good for the soul. And when I was writing The Philosophy of Cider and rhapsodising about slow cider, I felt really grumpy about minimum juice concentrate ciders, but I knew I had to mention them in the book. And I never write negatively, and I was really perplexed on how to write about mainstream apple alcopops without being really negative about it. And then last year, it was around this time actually, it was Harvest, I was invited as a guest by Heineken, and they took a few people in the media and people who were influential. They invited me, and we went to one of the orchards that supplies apples to Heineken, and it was incredible. I'd been at Little Pomona. I used to pank the trees by hand. We'd be on our hands and knees picking up the apples in Little Pomona. So seeing how it's done on a huge scale with these tractors that shake the trees and all the apples fall, and then a vacuum cleaner comes and sucks them all up. And then we went to the Ledbury, to the cider mill, and we saw this humongous operation of these lorries coming and dumping tons and tons and tons of apples. And then it struck me how important those apples are to the rural economy. And so mainstream cider is absolutely crucial to keep those orchardists having these contracts. You know, the man that we met, Skittery Farms, you may know, I don't know his first name, but you may know the family, and they have 25-year contracts with Heineken. So it changed my mind on how I was going to write about mainstream cider, and I ended up writing it as a positive rather than as a negative, so I felt happy about that. And I realised there are two philosophies of cider making and cider drinking, and that the countless people who drink the latter, which is the mainstream concentrate juice ciders, wouldn't enjoy the cider that we've been drinking tonight. You know, to them that isn't cider. I remember really clearly at a corporate event I was doing, it was my favourite client actually, and they paid really quickly, and they booked me for many, many different events. Sometimes I'd do a gin tasting, sometimes wine tasting. And the previous month before I'd done cider tasting, we'd done white wine tasting. And I had a very acidic white wine. I think it was a Picpoul de Pinet. And then the following month we had cider. And it was a bottle, I got a bottle of Little Pomona, I can't remember which one. And a woman tasted it, who'd been there at my wine tasting. She tasted it, she went, like that. And I said, oh, what? She said, oh, like that. And I said, You loved the Picpoul de Pinet last month. That cider is it's very similar, it's very acidic, almost the same sort of thing. She says, no, that's not cider. Cider is in a pint glass and it's fizzy and it's sweet. So to her, what she was drinking, this amazing cider, wasn't cider. So I always remember that she probably wouldn't want to drink what we were drinking tonight because that's not cider to her. So anyway, I acknowledge that and you know the difference that people have with the definition of what cider is, and all my grumpiness went when I was writing my book about the minimum juice concentrate ciders, because cider means different things to different people. To some Americans, cider is a non-alcoholic, unfiltered apple juice. To millions around the world, it's a tangy, sweet, refreshing, fizzy, chilled, fruity, alcoholic beverage. To us, cider is endlessly fascinating in its iterations, from the driest, most acidic to the unctuously sweet, rough scrumpy to barrel-aged vintage, still and sparkling, soft or firm tannins, light to full-bodied, young or mature. It's a refreshing long drink, an elegant champagne style served in a flute, or a sipping brandy after dinner. If cider was human, it would need therapy for the multiple personalities. Slow cider is sunlight in a glass, the liquid expression of the orchard soul. And that's why we evangelise and worship at the altar of the apple. Thank you for listening.
There were lots of lovely little sound bites in this keynote by Jane Peyton, one of which is, if cider was human, it would need therapy for the multiple personalities. Yeah, definitely that's something we put on cider. Cider didn't take that on its own. And the other piece is the description of cider right near the end. She said, the liquid expression of the orchard's soul. Yeah, so I'm hoping that this encourages you to seek out the Philosophy of Cider in the US of A starting February 2025. You could get your local bookstores to order it for you. So it'll be available in the US, and we'll have links to it also on Amazon too, I suspect, moving forward. And you should know that she won a silver award for this book earlier this past year, 2024, via the British Guild of Beer Writers. They have an annual award event. They have a new category for cider writing, and that category, that cider writing award, is named in honor of Susanna Forbes. So super, super poetic. And yeah, there's just so much there, so much feeling. We're going to bring that feeling forward moving into 2025 because, we take Ciderville with us, the people who are members of our family. Yeah, they follow us along out and about in Ciderville for sure. All right, a few more things here. She mentioned a film, and there was a film that was presented during the Hereford AppleFest. This was a film that was produced by an organization called Herefordshire Life Through a Lens. It's a lovely film, and each year I guess they do this. I actually don't quote me on that, but this year's film was built around songs, poems, and folklore associated with apples, pears, orchards, and Herefordshire's heritage. So do check that out. There is a link in the show notes to this here episode 440. You'll be able to find that film, be able to watch it. It's not too long. And also find out the links to the School of Booze and everything about Jane Peyton to be able to follow along. And of course, she also has her other book series under her pen name, B.A. Summers. And she was talking about that, how in the second book she mentioned Little Pomona. So if you are into a little bit of fiction, and if you're like me and you really love Jane Peyton's style, do check that out. So we'll have links to all that following up once again in this here episode 440 of Cider Chat. And I really want to say to all of you out there in Ciderville, we are kicking off 2025 the right way with this first in a series on the English cider culture. getting all of us warmed up for the upcoming 2025 Totally Cider Tour UK edition. This coming August of 2025. Make sure to get your name on the wait list today. Send that email to info@ciderchat.com. Put in Cider Tours in the subheading and let us know how many folks are in your party. And with that, I leave you here. This is Ria Windcaller signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
Apples, bitter sharp, strange apples, juicy ripe. Bop, 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 ba-da-doo-dee-da, bop, 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 ba-da-doo-dee-da. Who wants a tannenbaum?
I want a tannenbaum.
Who wants to pull them down?
I'm gonna pull them down. Hey, 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 apples, bittersweet,
Strange apples,
hanging high.
got them strange apples.
Forget the pie.
Strange apples,
Squeeze them tight.
got them
Strange apples. Strange apples. Strange apples.
make them pop. Pop, 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 ba-da-doo-dee-da, pop, 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 ba-da-doo-dee-da.
Who wants a tannenbaum?
I want a tannenbaum.
Who wants to pull them down?
I'm gonna pull them down. Hey, 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 apples.
Come and see. Plenty strange apples for you and me. Strange apples. Strange apples. Strange apples.